Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, and my channel is Asserting What is True. And we're going to be doing the last chapter of Amusing Ourselves to Death tonight, with chapter 11. And again, Neil Postman is the author of this particular book. And I hope that you've enjoyed it. And this gives us an idea of where our society has changed since this was 1985 book. So we're talking about 95, 2005, 2015. So roughly, well, almost 38 years ago, you see. And I think he was right. This chapter 11 will really basically give you a more of an idea as he talks about what we call the two major um, writers in last century. That would be Aldous Huxley and uh, Orwell himself. And that's what this chapter is going to be dealing with. So the chapter is chapter 11, the Huxleyan Warning. There are two ways by which the spirit of culture may be shriveled. In the first, the Orwellian, culture becomes a prison. In the second one, the Huxleyan, culture becomes a vertilis. No one needs to be reminded that our world is now marred by many prison cultures whose structure Orwell described accurately in his parables. If one were to read both 1984 and Animal Farm, and then for good measure, authors Kostler's Darkness at Noon, one would have a fairly precise blueprint of the machinery of thought control as it currently operates in scores of countries and on millions of people. Of course, Orwell is not the first to teach us about the spiritual devastation of tyranny. What is irreplaceable about his work is his insistence that it makes little difference if our wardens are inspired by right or left wing ideologies. The gates of the prison are equally impenetrable, surveillant equally rigorously, iconic worship equals pervasiveness. And he's correct. The right wing and the left wing ideologies will lead you to that particular perspective. Meanwhile, Huxley teaches that in the age of advanced technology, spiritual devastation is more likely to come from an enemy with a smiling face than from one whose countenance eludes suspicion and hate. In the Huxley prophecy, Big Brother does not watch us by his choice. We watch him by ours. There's a need for wardens or gates or ministers of truth. When a population becomes distracted by trivia, which cultural life is redefined as a perpetual round of entertainments, when serious public conversations become a form of baby talk, when, in short, a people become an audience and their public business a vaudeville act, then a nation finds itself at risk. That is, cultural death is a clear possibility. In America, Orwell's prophecies are a small relevance, but Huxley's are well underway towards being realized. Let me interject here. Now, this is still, this book was printed in 1984 or 85. So the Soviet Union was still together. The wall between Berlin and the two Germanys were still separated. So you can see that the whole idea of the Orwellian perspective was still strong. But that's all changed after 1989. The walls came down and Eastern Europe became free, and supposedly no longer the Soviet Union became Russia. And today we are looking at different kinds of things, even to now, and what could be a world war between apparently the uh, Russia and others against the West. Or is it simply the West will completely collapse before that even takes place? Anyway, I just wanted to share share my perspective here. For America is engaged in the world's most ambitious experiment to accommodate itself to the technological distractions made possible by the electric plug. This is an experiment that began slowly and modestly in the mid-19th century and is now in the latter half of the 20th reached a perverse maturity in Americans' consumers' love affair with television. As nowhere else in the world, Americans have moved far and fast in bringing to a close the age of the slow-moving printed word. They have granted to television sovereignty over all of their institutions by ushering in the age of television. America has given the world the clearest available glimpse of a Huxleyan future. Those who speak about this matter must often raise their voices to a near hysterical pitch, inviting the charge that they are everything from wimps to public nuisances to Jeremiahs. But they do so because what they want others to see appears benign when it's not invisible altogether. An Orwellian world is much easier to recognize, you see. He's correct. And to oppose than a Huxley world. Everything in our background has prepared us to know and resist a prison when the gates begin to close around us. We are not likely, for example, to be indifferent to the voices of the Sarharas and the Tomarians and the Wasizans. We take arms against such a sea of trouble, buttressed by the spirit of Milton, Bacon, Voltaire, Goethe, and Jefferson. But what is there are no cries of anguish to be heard. Who is prepared to take arms against a sea of amusements? To whom do we complain, and when and in what tone of voice, when serious discourse dissolves into giggles? What is the antidote to a culture being drained by laughter? I fear that our philosophers have given us no guidance in this matter. Their warnings have customarily been directly against those consciously formulated ideologies that appear to the worst tendency in human nature. But what is happening in America is not the design of articulate ideology. No Mein Kampf or Communist Manifesto announces its coming. It comes as an unintended consequence of a dramatic change in our modes of public conversation. But it is an ideology nonetheless, for it imposes a way of life, a set of relations among people and ideas about which there has been no consensus, no discussion, and no opposition. Only compliance. Public consciousness has not yet assimilated the point that technology is an ideology. It is an ideology, folks. This in spite of the fact that before our very eyes, technology has altered every aspect of life in America during the past 80 years. For example, it would have been inexcusable in 1905 for us to be unprepared for the culture changes the automobile would bring. Who would have suspected then that the automobile would tell us how we were to conduct our social and sexual lives, would reorient our ideas about what to do with our with our forests, our woods, and cities, would create new ways of expressing our personal identity and social standing. But it's much later in the game now, and ignorance of the score is inexcusable. Be aware that the technology comes equipped with a program for social change. To maintain that technology is neutral. To make the assumption that technology is always a friend to culture is, at this late hour, stupidity, plain and simple. Moreover, we have seen enough by now to know that technological changes in our mode of communications are even more ideology laden than changes in our mode of transportation. Introduce the alphabet to a culture and you change its cognitive habits, its social relations, its notion of communication, of community, history, and religion. Introduce the printing press with movable type, and you do the same. Introduce speed of light transmission of images, and you make a cultural revolution without a vote, without a polemics, without guerrilla resistance. Here is ideology, pure, if not serene. Here is ideology without words, and all the most powerful for their absence. All that is required to make it stick is a population that devoutly believes in the inevitability of progress. And in this sense, all Americans are Marxists. We believe nothing if not that history is moving us towards some preordained paradise, and that technology is the force behind that movement. Thus, there are near insurmountable difficulties for anyone who has written such a book as this and who wishes to end it with some remedies for the afflictions. In the first place, not everyone believes a cure is needed. And in the second, there probably isn't any. But as a true blue American who has invisible, the unthinkable, the unshakable belief that where there is a problem, there must be a solution, I shall conclude with the following suggestions. We must, as a start, not to delude ourselves with preposterous notions such as the straight, lily-like position as outlined, for example, in Jerry Manders, Manders, 4 arguments for the elimination of television. Americans will not shut down any part of their technological apparatuses, and to suggest that they do so is to make no suggestion at all. It is almost equally unrealistic to expect that non-trivial modification in the availability of media will ever be made. Many civilized nations limit by law the amount of hours television may operate and thereby mitigate the role television plays in public life. But I believe that this is not a possibility in America. Once having opened the happy medium to full public view, we are not likely to counter even its partial closing. Still, some Americans have been thinking along these lines. As the writer's story appears in New York Times, September 27, 1984, about the plans of the Farmington, Connecticut Library Council to sponsor a TV turnoff. It appears that such an effort was made the previous year, the idea being to get people to stop watching television for 1 month. The Times reported that the turnoff previous January was widely noted by the media. Mrs. Ellen Babcock, whose family participated, in quoted saying, "It will be interesting to see if the impact is the same this year as last year, when we had terrific media coverage." In other words, Mrs. Babcock hopes that by watching television, people will learn that they ought to stop watching television, you see. It is hard to imagine that Miss Babcock does not see the irony in this position. It's an irony that I have confronted many times in being told that I must appear on television to promote a book that warns people against television, such as a contradiction of television-based culture. In any case, of how much help in 1 month turnoff, is it a mere pittance? That is to say, a pittance? How comforting it must be when the folks in Farmington are done with their punishment and can return to their true occupation. Nonetheless, one applauds their efforts, and one must applaud the efforts of those who are some relief in limiting certain kinds of content on television. For example, excessive violence, commercials on children's shows, etc. And I'm particularly fond of John Lindsay's suggestion that political commercials be banned from television, as we now ban cigarettes and liquor commercials. I would gladly testify before the FCC as to manifold merits of the excellent idea. Those who would oppose my testimony declaring me that such a ban is a clear violation of the First Amendment. I would offer a compromise, require all political commercials to be preceded by a short statement on the fact that common sense has determined that watching political commercials is hazardous to the intellectual health of the community. I'm not very optimistic about anyone taking this suggestion seriously. Neither do I put much stock in proposals to improve the quality of television programs. Television, as I have implied earlier, serves us most usefully when presenting junk entertainment. It serves us most ill when it co-opts serious modes of discourse, news, politics, science, education, commerce, religion, and turns them into entertainment packages. We would all be better off if television got worse, not better. The A-Team, Cheers are no threat to our public health. 60 Minutes and Eyewitness News and Sesame Street are. The problem, in any case, does not reside in what people watch. The problem is in that we watch. The solution must be found in how we watch, or I believe it may fairly be said that we have yet to learn what television is. And the reason is that there has been no worthwhile discussion, let alone widespread public understanding of what information is and how it gives direction to a culture. There is a certain potency in this, since there are no people who more frequently, enthusiastically use such phrases as the information age, the information explosion, and the information society. We apparently advanced to the point where we have grasped the idea that a change in the form's volume, speed, and context of information means something, but we have not got any further, you see. What is information? Or more precisely, what are information? What are its various forms? What conceptions that is of intellectual wisdom and learning does each form insist upon? What conceptions does each form neglect or mock? What are the main psychic effects of each form? What are the relations between information and reason? A hell of a lot. What is the kind of information that best facilitates thinking? Is there a moral bias to each information form? What does it mean to say that there is too much information? How would one know? What redefinitions of important cultural meanings to do news source, speed, contexts, and forms of information required. Does television, for example, give a new meaning to piety, to patriotism, to privilege? Does television give a new meaning to judgment or to understanding? How do different forms of information persuade? Is a newspaper public different from television public? How do different information forms dictate the type of content that is expressed? These questions and dozens more like them are the means through which it might be possible for Americans to begin talking back to their television sets, to use Nicholas Johnson's phrase, where no medium is excessive dangerous if its users understand what its dangers are. It's important that those who ask the questions arrive at my answers or Marshall McLuhan's, quite different answers, by the way. This is the instance in which the asking of a question is sufficient. To ask is to break the spell, to which I might add that questions about the psyche, political, and social effects of information are as applicable to the computer as to television. That's a good question because I don't use the television at all, don't have one. Well, I should say I have one, but it doesn't work. It's just a piece of furniture. To the computer, which is where I do spend my time in, will that become the next thing? That's just my question. Although I believe the computer to be a vastly overrated technology, I mention it here because clearly Americans have, according to their customary mindless intentions, which means they will use it as they are told without a whimper. Thus, a central thesis of computer technology that the principal difficulties we have in solving problems stem from insufficient data will go unexamined until years from now, when it will be noticed that the massive collection and speed of life retrievals of data have been of great value to large-scale organizations, but have solved very little of importance to most people, and have created at least as many problems for them as they may have solved. You hear what he's saying? He says, when it will be noticed that the massive collection and speed of light retrieval of data, the data they collect from you, what you watch and what you don't watch, what you care to see, what you share. In any case, the point I'm trying to make is that only through a deep, unfailing awareness of structure and effects of information, through a demystification of media, is there any hope of our gaining some measure of control over television or the computer or any other medium. How is it such medium consciousness to be achieved? There are only two answers that come to mind, one of which is nonsense and can be dismissed almost at once. The other one is desperate, but it is all we have. The nonsensical answer is to create television programs whose intent would be not to get people to stop watching television, but to demonstrate how television ought to be viewed, to show how television recreates and degrades our conception of news, political debate, religious thought, etc. I imagine such a demonstration would, if necessary, take the form of parodies, such along the lines of Saturday Night Live or Monty Python. The idea being to induce a nationwide horse laugh over television control of public discourse. But naturally, television would have the last laugh. In order to command an audience large enough to make a difference, one would have to make the programs vastly amusing, you see, in the television style. Thus, the act of criticism itself would, in the end, be co-opted by television. The parodists would become celebrities, would stars in movies, and would end up making television commercials. The desperate answer is to rely on the only mass medium of communication that, in theory, is capable of addressing the problem. That is, our schools. This is a conventional American solution to all dangerous social problems, and is, of course, based on a naive and mystical faith in the officiality of education. The process rarely works. In a matter of hand, there is even less reason than usual to expect it to. Our schools have not yet even gotten around to examining the role of the printed word in shaping our culture. Indeed, you will not find two high school seniors in 100 who could tell you within a 500-year margin of error when the alphabet was invented. Wow. I suspect most do not even know that the alphabet was invented. I have found that even when the question is put to them, they appear puzzled, as one has asked, when were trees invented or clouds? Is it the very principle of myth, as Roland Barthes pointed out, that is transformed history into nature, and to ask of our schools that they engage in the task of demythifying media is to ask something the schools have never done. And yet there is a reason to suppose that the solution is not hopeless. Educators are not unaware of the effect of television on their students. Stimulated by the arrival of the computer, they discuss it a great deal, which is to say, they have become somewhat media conscious. It is true enough that much of their consciousness centers on the question, how can we use television or the computer or word processor to control education? They have not yet got to the question, how can we use education to control television or the computer or word processor? But our reach for solutions ought to exceed our present grasp or what I'm dreaming for. Besides, it is an acknowledgement task of the schools to assist the young in learning how to interpret the symbols of their culture. That this task should now require that they learn how to distance themselves from their forms of information. It's not so bizarre an enterprise that we can not hope for its inclusion in the curriculum, even hope that it would be placed at the center of education. What I suggest here is a solution is what Aldous Huxley suggested as well, and I can do no better than that, or than he. He believed with H.G. Wells that we are in a race between education and disaster. And he wrote continuously about the necessity of our understanding of politics and the epistemology of media. Or in the end, he was trying to tell us that what afflicted the people in Brave New World was not that they were laughing instead of thinking, but they did not know what they were laughing about and why they had stopped thinking. And that is the conclusion of the book. Chapter 11. And so this is a good book, folks. Hopefully I'll be able to read another book by Neil Postman, The Disappearance of Childhood. I think that would be a good book to read. Maybe read that sometime here. I've got many books I'd like to read to you, and that's what I'm doing. So I appreciate you being here tonight and sharing in the enlightenment of what has been going on for the past, well, since the late 40s, basically early 50s with television. So from 1950, so basically I'm 62 years old, and television was actually invented more than that, but basically programming began in basically in the 50s when television began to be put in people's houses and became a source of entertainment. I find it really odd now as I've gotten older. Why did I spend so much time in front of the television in my early life? Why did I give so much time to it instead of me going out in nature or me doing something else? I know people actually do what I call when you work from, I was working second shift job and then the first shift job. You have less time for even digging like I've been reading to you. I've been blessed in that area of my life to share this information for you. My meaning a lot of times simply was I bought some books and I was getting the meaning of reading these books, and I get involved with one or two. Next thing I know, I lose interest in them. Not because they wasn't good books, but simply because did not basically do what I would call force myself to read instead of just simply sitting on the sidelines. And so some of the books I have here are important books, and a lot of that is because I wanted to know the truth. And but I see things today compared, and I yet can compare myself as a 25-year-old. Yeah, I didn't do a lot of reading. I listened to a lot of radio, you see, and I still watch television a lot, even at that time. It's only been in the last probably 20 years that I've actually pushed myself away from television. I found that basically television itself was just a waste of time. And just basically it reveals a lot about a culture that no longer communicates by either talking with one another in the neighborhood, or it's a soothing tool to not to deal with reality. That's what I see it is. Most people don't want to deal with reality now, and it's easier. It's like a drug. There's a song I think was called back in the 70s or maybe early 80s, "Love is a Drug." I don't remember the lyrics, but it was somewhat popular for one time. And his situation simply was speaking already that love is a drug. And it wasn't what I call real love, you see. You see, it was a love in a lot of ways what was manufactured, what it looked like on television by movie stars, you see. But anyway, I appreciate you being here tonight. Thank you for being here. I hope that you enjoyed this book. I hope that as I share my time with you, I am actually sharing seeds of information so that you could actually take the time to open your eyes and give ear to your ears to hear the truth. And this is an excellent book. Someone was trying to warn us long ago. So thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for spreading my videos to other people. I appreciate that very much. And let's continue to pursue the truth and make ourselves a better people to actually love others and to have the ability to communicate to them in a way what truth is all about. Thank you. You have a good evening.